But also, I think these coaches need to sit down and figure out, what are we doing at halftime? What are we doing in the third quarter, offensively and defensively, where we just don't seem like we are ready when we come out of the locker room.
Midweek session with the Birds 365 guys, Mac and Mac. We're adding a third voice to the mix, and a very informed one as well. Does a great job covering the Birds for both Bleeding Green Nation and on his podcast, Eye on the Enemy. John Stolnis jumps in with us here on Birds 365. You got green on? Is that a green?
You got a hat. I went old school this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to have to make God forbid if it's Phillies Houston, because we're going to have to make Jalen Hurts pretend he's a Phillies fan.
Yeah, I think Jalen's savvy enough. He'll get it.
He will get it. He is savvy enough. He will get it. It is a good time for you, John. Obviously, cover the Phillies as well at the Good Fight. But you know, we're an Eagles show, so I'll get some Phillies in at the very end. But as far as this team, as we head to the bye, I saw you pop in there. You might have heard Jody and I discussing. You know, I kind of look at this. I think a lot of people have said, you know, if the Eagles put together this perfect game, how good could they be? But, you know, that's kind of a standard that's unreachable. As a contrarian by nature, I go the other way. Can they keep this up? Can they keep playing this well? And I point to the tackling. Even more than special teams, because that has been, and if you look at the PFF numbers, that has been the one area that the Eagles have been consistently bad in. Not even mediocre, bad. 30th in the NFL. Only one team worse, tied for 30th. Jacksonville's the only, our old friend Doug Peterson. Right. Everything else, they're top 10, basically, except special teams. But they're better in special teams than tackling. Am I being too concerned, too self-scouty in this bye week? As nobody cares about tackling, as Jody rightfully points out. But he's right. Contextually, though, they've been at the bottom. They've been the worst of the worst. Any concern to you?
I think as long as they're getting a big lead early, I don't worry as much about the tackling, because we're really seeing that manifest itself in the run game. And if you're ahead by 2 touchdowns, if you're ahead by 17 points, 20 points like they were against Dallas, and Dallas is going to run the ball to get back into it, you're probably okay with that for the most part. I think the other side of that coin too is what I saw on Sunday night, especially in the third quarter. I saw a lot of guys trying to go after the ball as opposed to trying to lock up the ball carrier. And we know that this team is getting a ton of turnovers. They lead the NFL in turnover margin, and that's been one of the big keys to their success early going. They've forced a lot of fumbles. It's worked in a lot of cases where going after the ball, being a ball hawk, knocking it out and recovering it has been beneficial to them. It gives you a short field. It means Jalen Hurts doesn't have to go 85 yards every single time. But the other side of that coin is that you sometimes will have the first guy, second guy, third guy miss. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. I think there are times where, especially if you're up by 14, 17 in the third quarter, at that point, you don't really need a kill shot. You just need to stop the other team from stringing together first downs. And so I think that's where you could maybe, as the defensive coordinator, say, listen, stop trying to go after the ball because it's leading to arm tackling. Get in front of the guy, get him down to the ground, make them punt, and let's let our offensive line, let's let our running game, let's let Jalen Hurts ice this thing for us like they did in the fourth quarter last time around. I'm not overly concerned about it, but it's a worry.
Here's what scares me even more than tackling. And John's point, of course, is right on. But it's just I'm one not surprised about it. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised about what I'm concerned with. 6 wins, 3 of which the game got close. The Eagles needed to be able to both kill clock and move the ball. And they did just that against Detroit week 1, against Arizona, and this past week against Cowboys. When they needed it in the fourth quarter, the other team was making it a game. They took control and said, we're going to run it right down your throat. And they did. And they've effectively won all 3 games. Detroit never got back on the field. Arizona had to settle for a longer field goal than the one the Eagles did. And the Cowboys were taken out because they actually turned that long drive into a touchdown. Is that over expectations? That when we, and I state it this way, obnoxiously so, for a reason, when we want to, we'll run it right down your throats. Is that too much to believe that they can just reach into their back pocket, play that card, and go, oh, yeah, here's a 7.5 minute drive. Take this.
I don't know.
Are they that good that they can just do that? They have been. Can they continue doing it that way?
I don't know if they have an 8-minute fourth quarter drive in them every game, but I think it was impressive that they did it against the Dallas Cowboys, who are legitimately one of the best defenses in the NFL. True. And when your big strength is your offensive line and you have the depth on their offensive line that they do, I think you can rely on the second best running game in the NFL last year to be that unit that will get you along clock-eating drive when you need to stop the bleeding. And that's really what they did. They needed to stop the bleeding. It's like a relief pitcher coming in and giving you 3 innings after the starter gets shelled, right? You need someone to come in and stop the bleeding. And the Eagles running game did just that. They've done that a few different times. I think we've seen that you can rely on it to a degree, as much as you can rely on anything in sports. The Eagles run game is about a reliable thing in the NFL right now with the RPO. No one does this like the Eagles are doing it. And then when you get to the end of that drive and you get close to the red zone, all of a sudden now you've run the ball 9 plays. A.J. Brown's going to pop now for 22. And then, okay, Devontae Smith's going to leak out into the end zone and you're going to score a touchdown. So it's a formula that NFL defensive coaches have not cracked just yet. And so I think it's a pretty dependable thing at the moment. And I think we also have to remember last week in the third quarter, and I think we saw this the week before as well in Arizona, they're dealing with offensive line issues, guys shuttling in, shuttling out. When you lose Lane Johnson, it takes a few series to figure out how to deal with that for especially a young offensive line, a guy like Jack Driscoll moving from left tackle to right tackle, and he's all over the place. It takes a little bit of a time to get everybody on the same page. And I think by the fourth quarter, their third possession in the second half, remember, it was only their third possession. The defense allowed the Cowboys to have 2 long drives. The offense really didn't get their hands on the ball all that much in the second half last week. By their third possession, without Lane Johnson, they had gotten it figured out. And I think you can rely on that.
Yeah, I like that word, John, reliability, because I think the running game for this team is very reliable. I think even when you talk about losing the offensive lineman, because Landon's been dealing with this ankle, this foot injury. He's been in and out. Sue Pettit comes in. You mentioned Jack Driscoll, whether it's left tackle, right tackle. Sometimes those guys have trouble with pass protection, but they can go straight ahead.
Yeah.
And we know Jordan Mailata and Dickerson, how good they are. And Jalen Hurts says the vaunted +1. I'd like to say, yeah, people don't know what to do. The conflict on that past A.J. Brown, where Micah Parsons, he doesn't know what to do with that RPO. Do you go after the quarterback? Do you drop into coverage? I think all of that is reliable. I like that word. Now, I talked about the tackling. That hasn't been reliable. I'm going to give you one other category. And Jonathan Gann is going to hate me for this. All defensive coordinators are. But there's a certain randomness to turnovers in the NFL. And nobody wants to admit that. I don't want to use the term luck. Whatever term you want to use, there's a randomness to it. And the Eagles are turning the ball over and turning the ball over and turning the ball over, and they're protecting the football. They're +12, John.
Yeah.
The second-ranked team in the NFL is +4. That is astronomical.
Yeah.
Can that continue, or is there going to be a regression to the mean?
There will probably be a little bit of a regression to the mean, but we have seen teams in the past play a full season where, for whatever reason, they're just scooping up turnovers and interceptions all over the place, and it lasts for a full season. And we might see that with this team this year, because I think if you look beyond the turnovers, the cornerback play of Darius Slay and James Bradbury, just how few yardage, how few passes they're allowing and how few yards they're allowing indicates that they're not getting lucky with interceptions. They're not, Asante Samuel was a great player, but Samuel sometimes would get would get burned because he would, be too aggressive and going for picks. I don't think those are the kinds of interceptions we're seeing. The last interception by Gardner Johnson on Sunday night came because of pressure up the middle.
Spraying the gram,
Yeah, exactly. And so I think if you can, I think one of the areas the Eagles could look at the trade deadline is getting some more help along the defensive line, because the more pressure that they can get with four guys, the more of an opportunity you're going to give those guys in the secondary to pick balls off, and because they're playing so well. And one thing we've seen from this secondary that we haven't seen from Eagles defenses in years past is not just getting their hand on the ball, but actually catching it. One of the jokes we used to have at BGN Radio was we used to say a lot of these Eagles defensive backs had butts for hands. Like, it's just like they're catching every ball with their fists. And it's really hard to intercept the ball when you can't actually bring it in. And what we're seeing with this group is they do that. They actually can bring the ball in when they're in the air, competing with a wide receiver for it. The Gardner Johnson interception, I don't think we've talked about how great a catch that was from a guy who left the game with a bad hand. I don't know how he got his hands underneath that ball and held on to it. In seasons past, that kind of falls through his hands and it's an incomplete pass, and the Cowboys drive continues. So I don't know that they can continue this at the rate that they're doing it, but they have the formula in place to cause turnovers, and right now they are finishing the play.
And, oh, by the way, John gave you the numbers. They're plus 12 right now as the lead team in the NFL. Second place, plus 4. That's just almost incomprehensible, the difference between them and the second best. Not any other team. The second best team, they're 8 turnovers ahead. They're 8. They're plus 8.
Yeah.
In the plus column, part of that credit's got to go to the offense.
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts doesn't throw picks. Jalen Hurts, as much as he runs, doesn't cough up the football. Miles Sanders, although he's at times in his career had an issue or two with fumbling, hadn't had it this year so far. Yes, let's give the appropriate credit to the defense. But if you're talking plus minus, the Eagles take care of the football, and Nick Sirianni does prioritize that. Sure, he even took a shot at Joel Embiid, which, oh, by the way, he was right because Joel turned.
No, he was 100% right.
Night. You got to take care of the ball, Joel.
Yeah. By the way,
give the props to the Eagles offense, too.
Real quick, before you jump in, John, I asked Nick that question. He wasn't taking a shot at Joel. He was just being lighthearted, but he's 100% right. I mean, Joel Embiid needs to and by the way, it's not happening. Now we're getting into a Sixers wormhole. He's not taking care of the book. But so anyway, go ahead, John.
Well, I think one of the things we've seen also is the running backs have done a great job of protecting the ball. Miles Sanders has long had a fumbling issue, but that hasn't been the case. I think I read today he's somewhere over 120 some straight carries without a fumble. It's just the way they are being really drilling that on with these guys to take care of the football. Running as much as they do, you would expect a couple more balls to hit the ground. But they're just not, it's not even like that they're fumbling and recovering them. They're just not putting it on the ground. So I agree with you. The offense, as far as the plus minus ratio goes, Jalen Hurts not throwing picks, being very disciplined with the football. They have receivers now who are big targets in the middle of the field so that defenses can't clog up certain areas of the field and cluster in certain places to get turnovers and get interceptions. He's spreading the ball all around the field, and when they're running it, they're not putting it on the ground. I think it's been a point of emphasis for them, and we're seeing it work its way so far to their benefit.
You mentioned something that perked my interest up, John. The trade deadline's coming up November 1st. Carolina's having a bit of a fire sale, or at least that's the speculation. Robbie Anderson's already out. We'll see if Christian McCaffrey. I do not think Brian Burns they're going to trade him. But you mentioned the defensive line. I look at this team and I say, I don't know if I want to mess with this team. Mike Gill is going to be on the show with us in the second hour. He asked me on his show yesterday about Deshaun Jackson. I'm like, I want no part of Deshaun Jackson. Luckily, he signed with Baltimore, but just as a punt returner. And I was still like, no, I don't want him. I don't want him. Would he be better than Britton Covey? Yes, as a punt returner. But anybody who's met Deshaun, he's not a bad guy, but he thinks he's Deshaun Jackson of 28. He's not going to be happy with that role. I don't want to mess with this. Nick talks about it to the point it becomes a cliche, but the connection and how close everybody is, I don't want to mess with that. Am I crazy to say just leave it alone?
Well, it has to be at a position that you really need some help. And I think you have to do your due diligence and background on the guy's personality. We saw the Eagles add Jay Ajayi midway through the 2017 season. That team had great chemistry. They were rolling, but they perceived a weakness at the running back spot. They were one guy short, and they brought in a guy in Ajayi who seemed to fit right in, didn't mess with clubhouse chemistry. He provided a ton of production in the second half of that season and was a big part of their Super Bowl run. So I think it can work. I wouldn't say that they shouldn't go out and get somebody, but they've got to feel, like you said, John, they've got something special going right now. And you don't want to mess with it. You don't want to screw with the clubhouse chemistry, with the locker room chemistry. And I agree with you that I think Deshaun Jackson wouldn't be a great fit at this time. And thankfully, he, again, like you said, signed with the Ravens. But if there is somebody else out there who they feel like can help in an area of weakness, and that's not a problem player, he's a guy that you feel is going to fit right in, I think you have to look at not just what they do on the field, but what their personality is like and what kind of teammate they would be mixing with this group before you went ahead and added them at the trade deadline.
Kind of with my partner here, I think it's more likely that the Eagles won't make a trade than they will. But Howie has always been a proactive guy.
Mm-hmm.
There are two ways he can be proactive here. One's got a deadline attached to it, 13 days, the trade deadline. The other is contract extensions. Now, we got three really key guys signed last year: Goddard, Mailata, Maddox. Huge, lock these guys up, make them part of the foundation. The Eagles defense has a lot of guys whose contracts are up at the end of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to pick and choose exactly the right one. There's a lot that goes into it. Who wants to talk, who wants to stay, who wants to be reasonable. Is there a pecking order you would put Hargrave and Cox and Bradbury and Gardner Johnson and Kaiser White and Edward, both linebackers? That's a whole lot of your defense's contracts up at the end of this
Marcus
year.
Epps, throw Marcus
FC in there too. Do you think there's a priority in that mix?
I do. I mean, well, I would probably focus on the two secondary guys first. I would probably focus on Bradbury and Gardner Johnson. It's such a huge thing when you can just put two cornerbacks on a guy in Slay and Bradbury and just really not have to worry about doing a whole lot to help those guys. And Avonte Maddox is, of course, a really good cornerback. Like you mentioned, he's going to be here for a while. Gardner Johnson has been a really big addition to this team, too. He kind of got off to a little bit of a slow start as he got familiar with the defense, but obviously last week, Sunday night against the Cowboys, he had a phenomenal game. After that, I'm looking at the linebackers, and I think it's an interesting decision between Kaiser White and TJ Edwards. Edwards has gotten so much better since his rookie season. Like we talk about these guys when they come to the NFL, they're not finished products. A lot of these guys can continue to improve, and Edwards has done that. I love Kaiser White. He's been a playmaker. You also have Nakobe Dean, who's going to need some playing time at some point. So I think you only sign maybe one of those guys long-term. My guess is, boy, if I had to choose between Edwards and Kaiser White, I'm probably choosing Edwards just because I think he's more of a captain of the defense. He plays middle linebacker. He is a guy that you selected as an undrafted rookie, and you've developed him. You probably have more invested in him. I would hate to lose Kaiser White, but Kaiser White would probably, need a little bit more, I think, than TJ Edwards, and that allows you to work Nakobe Dean into the lineup next year. That's a lot of thinking way down the road, but for right now, that's probably my pecking order, and the rest of the guys, I'm probably in wait-and-see mode.
More immediacy with this criticism, and Gannon got it again yesterday. I think the 6-0 record has kind of muffled this. I think if the Eagles were average 3-3 or even below average, this would be blown up to unbelievable proportions. But people still keep talking about Jordan Davis and when is he going to play more? When is he going to play more? The reps, which like I said, I'm a little surprised about because of how much overall success. Right now he's a run stopper. He's a 2-down guy, and everybody wants him out there for all this time. And my thing is, it's a luxury right now. You still have Fletcher Cox. You still have Javon Hargrave. As you kind of pointed out, John, with the linebackers, long term, it's going to be Nakobe. So you're kind of making that decision, TJ versus Kaiser. Same thing with Jordan Davis. Long term, he's going to be out there.
Yeah.
You got to make a decision, Fletcher or Javon. But you don't have to make that decision now. Why is everybody forcing? Why is everybody trying to speed that up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have some time. There's certainly I don't think if you wait a little bit of time, it's not going to necessarily convince a player to go someplace else, especially if this team has a special season. Guys are going to want to come back. And then you basically have to, choose what's going to be best for you long term. And you're going to have a Jalen Hurts contract to talk about at some point. So you've got to factor that into who you're going to extend on the defense and anybody on offense you want to extend. There's a lot of different things that go into this for sure. And, you'd like to have as many guys in the fold long term as you possibly can, but in the NFL, there are a whole lot of different moving pieces. I do trust Howie Roseman in this area. They seem to have made the right choice on most of these kinds of guys during the course. Really, the big miss was probably Carson Wentz, right? I mean, that just didn't work out. But other than that, I struggle to think of a player that they've re-signed that you look back and say that was a mistake. Maybe a Derek Barnett, but you only bring him back for 1 year. You know what I mean? Like there just hasn't really been anything where I think he's made a big miss.
Here's why I'm okay the way they're using Jordan Davis. As John said, it's a luxury item, and at least you get more snaps than Marlon now, which earlier in the year, Marlon would be getting more snaps there. So it's a progression. They're moving it up a little bit more every single week. So I'm not going to get on JG's case for that. They're doing he's handling Jordan Davis as best as he can be handled. All right, 6-0 bye week, John. They've got downtime. They come back. The schedule is not killer for the next couple of weeks. Eagles are certainly going to be favorites. When they come back and return to practice, they'll have the entire week to get ready for the opponents, have some extra time. What is it they should be looking to upgrade? Is there anything specifically in practice, getting to know each other, the whole Gardner Johnson had to get up to speed and several things that have gone down with this team this year? Is there anything in the limited amount of practice that A, the collective bargaining agreement gives them, and B, the front office / doctors and those who advise as to how much stress they should put on their players give them? What is it that Sirianni needs to upgrade when he has a little extra time to work with players next week during the bye week?
I heard you guys talking about special teams before the break. I think special teams is this team's big weakness right now. And so I think figuring out I am less concerned about the return game. I would love to have a returner out there like Turpin, like the guy the Cowboys had the other night, who could really change the game with one play. But those guys really are few and far between. And the return game in special teams anymore, nobody returns kickoffs anymore. It's all punts. And so I would love to be able to work somebody into that. But I don't know that you're adding that guy from outside, and the guys that you have are probably the guys that you have. So I'm working on the return game, like making sure that you're staying in your lanes, guys are getting covered, you're not getting burned on trick plays, all that kind of stuff. I think Michael Clay needs to get the special teams down and get that to be less of an Achilles heel for this team, because that will bite them if they're not careful. Tackling is the other thing. We talked about it at the start of the show here. They need to work on tackling to make sure that finding a balance between trying to strip the ball out and then bringing the ball carrier down to the ground. The other thing I would say is what's going on in the third quarter. A lot of times, again, like I mentioned, we've had offensive line stuff coming in and out, different guys getting hurt, learning what to do with Lane Johnson not in there. But also, I think these coaches need to sit down and figure out, what are we doing at halftime? What are we doing in the third quarter, offensively and defensively, where we just don't seem like we are ready when we come out of the locker room, where it takes us 15 minutes to kind of figure out what's going on. Are we eating too many oranges at halftime? Are we is the Gatorade spiked? Like, what's going on that we need to figure out how to get out of the gate in the second half, score on the first possession, treat the first possession of the second half like you would your first possession of the game, and see what's going on there, because that is a little bit concerning. Not a lot, because they usually have a big lead at halftime, but figure out what's going on in the third quarter.
All right, John. The main event, I can't believe I'm saying this, at John Stolnis on Twitter, last one from me. Obviously, cover the Eagles for Bleeding Green, but you cover the Phillies for the Good Bite PH, obviously. I mentioned at the top of the show I don't know if the Phillies are built for 162. They're not when you talk about teams like the Dodgers or the Astros, but short series, man, top of the rotation, power. And if the bullpen shows up, and it has been, that's all you need to win a short series. This team, in a lot of ways, is built for the playoffs. You agree with that?
Absolutely. And I've been saying that all year, that if they could get that monkey off their back of falling short of the playoffs, all of a sudden that pressure's off. And now you've got Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, 1-2 at the top of the rotation. You can pitch them 4 out of a possible 7-game series. And that's what they're going to do here. And the Phillies have not always taken advantage of Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola starts. I think they're under 500 over the last couple of years when those guys start games for them, which is a little weird. But, those guys give you a chance to win a 7-game series, to win 4 out of 7 every time you line them up. The offense, these guys are different guys are stepping up every night. Now Kyle Schwarber is getting hot. Bryce Harper is hot. You've got different guys at the bottom of the lineup who are coming through in big situations. The key to this team continuing its run is the bullpen. And I think all of these guys are pitching with confidence. They're all throwing strikes. That's been the big thing with this bullpen. Throw strikes. And Sirianni Dominguez is throwing 100-mile-an-hour strikes. Jose Alvarado is throwing 100-mile-an-hour strikes. They're just pumping one strike after another, quality pitches. And if you can continue to get the same kind of production that you've gotten from Brad Hand, from David Robertson's back, he pitched really well in the Cardinals series. You've got Andrew Bellotti, who's pitching really well. Zach Eflin out of the bullpen has been really great. The bullpen's going to be the key here, because I think the starters are going to do well enough to keep this team's head afloat. If the relievers can give them 2-3 innings every night, they are built to win against any team in the playoffs.
All right, JS, for my last question, I'm going to jump back over to the Eagles, and I'll probably tick off some of our streamers here, because I'm going to ask you a hypothetical that will keep the Eagles from being 17-0. Sorry. Okay. If they're 16-1 when the season's over and done with, okay? I know everybody, most of the people listening, and you certainly know the schedule, but I'm going to rip through it real fast. Home Pittsburgh, at Houston, home Commanders, at Indianapolis, home Green Bay, home Tennessee, at the New York Giants, that is, at Chicago, at Dallas, home New Orleans, home San Francisco Giants. If they're losing one game, and I will not accept week 18 because they've already salted away everything. In a game in which they're trying, no JV participation like last year, if they're going to lose one, which one is most likely?
I think it's probably at Dallas on Christmas Eve. If Dak Prescott is back, I think Dallas right now, to me, is probably the 3rd best team in the conference. I liked Minnesota from the start of the season. I picked them to win the North, but Eagles have obviously already beaten them. Dallas is good.
They've already beaten Dallas too, John.
That's true.
That's true. They missed the game this past week. But they did beat Dallas.
But no Dak Prescott.
And that's the thing. If Dak Prescott is back, they have had a hard time with Dak Prescott, with the exception of the game in what was it, 2019 at the end of the season?
Though. He was hurt.
That's right. Yes, he was hurting in that game. So. Yeah. And he might be hurting it. I mean, that's kind of been his MO. He's had a hard time staying healthy these last few years. So I think if you've got a healthy Dak Prescott in Dallas on Christmas Eve, I think that's a tough game. I think that's the most likely one that they would not be favored to win. If they're not going to be favored in any of these games down the stretch, that probably is the one that I would say they're most likely to lose.
I think John made a good point earlier about the tackling, and I'd say specifically with the tackling, it's running. Two guys who two guys who worry me: Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. Yeah, you're looking at two of the best running backs in the National Football League, and if that's not an area in which the Eagles excel, those could be tricky games for the Birds.
True.
Always a pleasure, John Stolnis. Thank you very much for jumping in. You can read him on Bleeding Green Nation and catch his podcast, Eye on the Enemy, where you get your better podcasts. Thanks much, bud. We'll punch you up again next month. Appreciate it.
Sounds good, guys. Talk to you then.